This unit's going to focus on group type behaviors. So we're going to look at two specific things. First of all, we're going to look at some vocabulary related to groups and how groups influence the individual and how the individual influences groups. And then we're also going to look at some information relating to leadership, which is technically one individual influencing the larger group in hopes of a beneficial outcome. So first thing I want to think about is, what is a group? A group is two or more people who generally think about themselves as us. So, people who ride the bus every day, that recognize each other, that talk to each other, would consider themselves as, the people that ride this bus. So we can consider them a group. Those people do interact, and they may even think of themselves as, us versus other people who ride a separate bus or who, drive to work, things like that. So even something as ambiguous as, riding a bus with a person and talking to them a couple times can create a feeling of a kind of a group togetherness or cohesiveness. So when we talk about groups, one thing that we recognize is that being in the presence of other people, being around, group members, can influence the individual's behavior. So initial research on social facilitation said that having other people there while we were doing a behavior made us do the behavior better. But what we've found recently is, instead of doing the behavior better, it pretty much makes our dominant response come out more. So if your dominant response is not to do better, then having other people there watching you is not going to make you do better. It's going to actually make you do worse. So if you are really good at swimming and you want to do better, then invite people to come to your swim meets. If you're not so hot at it, then don't invite people to come to your swim meets, because then it will just, having people there will actually make you worse at what you're doing as opposed to make you better at it. And one of the reasons that we notice this is because of the idea of evaluation apprehension. So we start thinking about other people watching us, other people thinking about what we're doing. And for people who are good at something, that kind of gives them a boost of confidence. Whereas for people that are not so hot at something, that makes them wonder, well, what happens if I screw up? And so it actually makes them worse at that activity. And we all have evaluation apprehension. This may be one of the reasons why we conform when we're in a group. So we recognize that, everyone else is behaving in a certain way, and we feel this apprehension of being evaluated by other people. We start thinking, they're going to look at us and think, what's wrong with her? She's not doing it right. So instead of doing what we think we should do, we start doing what other people are doing, or what we think other people are doing, in order to decrease some of that apprehension, some of that anxiety. You've probably experienced, at Northwest Vista, we focus a lot on group work in our face-to-face classes. You've probably experienced what we call social loafing, which is where in a group, the larger the group gets, the less we can actually figure out who's done what piece. And so some people are likely to loaf, or to not do their part, or to do less than their part of a project. So if you've been in a group where there were 5 people in the group and it was a PowerPoint presentation and 2 people worked really hard on it, the other 3 kind of said, like, oh, I have to work that day, or, oh, email it to me and I'll email you back something, and they emailed you something that was not up to your standards, or they didn't email you at all, and maybe they thought, well, other people will kind of take up the slack for me. That's what we call social loafing. So the people that are doing less work, or we would consider them what we call freeriders, people who are, part of the group, but not doing as much, and kind of just sitting back and letting everybody else do things, and just kind of riding along freely and getting the grade, or being, part of the group that gets looked at for completing this project, when in fact they didn't really do much of anything. Another concept that we see within groups that's interesting to me is what we call deindividuation, which is the idea that when a group is large enough and when an individual can't be identified themselves, people are more likely to behave differently. They're less likely to control themselves. They're more likely to do things that they may not have done previously. So if you think about Halloween, we've got a whole bunch of kids running around in costumes. So if you've got your face covered, we may not be able to recognize who you are. And so these kids are more likely to, egg somebody's house or toilet paper somebody's house. Or if they come to a house that just has a bowl of candy that says, please take one, they may be more likely to take a whole handful because, well, who's going to know that it was me that took a whole handful as opposed to just taking one. So we also see that people who are cloaked, people who don't show their faces, are more likely to behave in ways that maybe general society wouldn't agree with. So even people, there's a couple of research studies in your book that talk about people who are nurses, that when they can't be identified, when they're covered, that they behave in negative ways towards people and patients, even though we expect that being a nurse, you would behave in a positive way towards these people. So if you are moving out into the work environment or a social environment, keep that in mind. If someone is part of a group that can't be identified, either because they're wearing masks or because there's so many of them that you can't identify an individual, then we're more likely to see negative behaviors than we would in a smaller group or in a group where we could identify every single person who's part of that group. So let's switch gears and talk about leadership. So leaders are there to motivate and to guide a group of people in reaching a certain goal, whether it's a work-related goal or whether it's a sports team-related goal, things like that. So we can talk about different types of leadership. Task leadership is very focused on the specific goal or the specific task. So if you've had a manager who said, okay, I want you guys to reach this financial goal for this week, and this is how I want you to do it, and these are the incentives for doing it. If you need any help, let me know. I can help you figure out ways to reach our financial goals. Then that would be focused on the task, so task leadership. Whereas a social leader is more likely to focus on relationships between the group members, because we know that positive relationships between the group members facilitates working together. Although if they have too positive of relationships, or everybody's friends, then actually it can decrease the ability to work together, because instead of reaching our goal, we're kind of sitting around chatting about, what did you do this weekend? So we do recognize that leaders are going to typically be doing both task and social leadership. So as a leader, we want to be able to master skills of task leadership, so delegating responsibilities, working with people to make sure that they're meeting their goals, but not in a completely micromanaging sort of way, because that's not beneficial. But also we want to get to know the employees that we're working with so that they feel a sense of connection with you, to add in that social leadership piece as well. So we'll see that there's going to be times where task leadership is required, and there's also going to be times where social leadership is required. And as a person who's going to be moving into the workforce, and most likely as a leader with your education, you most likely will have to use both. So you want to be able to switch back and forth between the two and have skills that make you a leader on both fronts. We also find people who are what we call transformational leaders, and these guys and girls are people who have a vision. They're inspiring, and they have a significant influence over their group members. So they are able to bring their group from, maybe not working as well to working very well together through their vision, through their inspiration for the group. So a lot of times when you see movies, you've got this leader that comes into this group that's not doing so hot, whether it be a football team or some sort of sports team or a work team, and then leads them to this great place. Then that's an example of what we would call transformational leadership, and that takes a vision. So where are we going? How are we going to get there? And an understanding of how to both task and social leadership with folks in order to help us to inspire people in our group to get to that goal. Hopefully you enjoy what you'll learn this week about groups, and hopefully it also helps you kind of understand how groups work best. Usually smaller groups work better than larger groups, related to a lot of these concepts that we've already talked about. And hopefully it'll give you some ideas as to how to work better with your work groups in the classroom when you move into your face-to-face classes. Thanks.